Well, I apologize right now. I'll be pulling the Kleenex out of my pocket periodically. Whatever has hit the Branson household this week. So Tina's not here today because she's sick, and so you can hear it in my voice. But I was telling Bill when I came in that we're old school. We used to teach. I mean, if you were sick, you went to school because you didn't want to have to prepare lessons for the sub anyway. So, we teach when we're sick. So I apologize for the voice, but we'll fight through it this morning and hopefully get something out of it. I was going to ask, Ron, would you start us with a prayer? I'm not going to hand you the microphone because of the... Thank you, Ron. Appreciate it. So we have a little short period here between the end of Adrian's lessons and what would be the beginning of the next quarter as far as teachers are concerned. And so I'm going to take the month of February and cover it. And then I believe Joel has volunteered to take over in March, and he'll be doing what we usually call the spring quarter. So we don't have a long series of lessons coming, so you may just get a hodgepodge from me from week to week, but a little bit of time and piggyback off of what Adrian has been talking about. Adrian, just presented us a good series on worship and the aspects of worship. And I want to talk a little bit more about, I know we've talked a lot about it, but I want to talk a little bit more about prayer today, and maybe a little different aspect from what we've been talking about. But when we talk about prayer, we're given so many good examples in the Bible. What are some of the prayers that you think of when you think of kind of famous or scriptural biblical prayers? Okay, obviously the Lord's Prayer comes to mind for just about everybody. Of course, that was Jesus giving us the example, the sample prayer. What other prayers can you think of that are impactful in Scripture? Okay, Hannah's prayer, yes. Talking about Jesus' prayer in the garden where he's praying for his apostles and for unity and for safety and Father, these are mine, I brought them with me, I've kept them with me. Yeah. Exactly. Any others? Absolutely. The 23rd Psalms has been used as a prayer, by many people. I've heard that one prayed in church, from a pulpit. There's a lot of prayers that we can look at. And the first two I had were the two by Jesus, the Lord's Prayer, the prayer in the garden. Mary gives a prayer of thanksgiving that is a famous prayer. At the very, very beginning, I believe, of Luke, Luke chapter 1, it's a long prayer. It's a lot of beautiful, beautiful words to it.
Samson gives negative prayers. He gives selfish prayers.
Well, there's a lot of examples of that, aren't there? Of people that pray for things that are selfish. Not every example that we're given, we're given examples of all types of prayers throughout Scripture.
Check.
We have Solomon. What did Solomon pray for? Prayed for wisdom. He's got a fairly lengthy prayer, and it's listed in 1 Kings and in 2 Chronicles, where he prays for wisdom, but he also prays for several other things in there as far as the country is concerned and his leadership as a king. And so he does a good job with that. How many of you have heard of the prayer of Jabez? Okay? So anyway, and if you go to Psalms, there's a lot of the Psalms that are prayers, and a lot of those are David being thankful, being grateful, where David praises God in the Psalms, and a lot of those, I apologize, a lot of those are prayers that are, they're coming from deep down within him, where he is desperate, and he is in need, and he is in a hard time, and it's just a lot of beautiful prayers in the Bible. And so I think it's interesting that as we look at Scripture, we have so many examples of really special prayers. And I guess my question is, what makes those prayers special? When we read those prayers, what makes them special?
It's so personal.
Yeah, it's very personal.
They're, speaking to God. It's just very personal.
Yeah, it comes from, like I kind of said, it comes from deep within. It comes from a very personal space. Very heartfelt. And I think that's the one that, when I was thinking, okay, what makes these prayers special, is they're from the heart. They're very meaningful. They are very personal. And so I think that when we're talking about prayer, and of course, like I said, Adrian taught several lessons about how to pray, what the right way to pray, the wrong way to pray, a lot of different aspects. But I just want to look at some prayers today that are a little bit different. So before I even do that, let's redefine what is a prayer. What is a prayer?
Well, that's a good question, because I was going to say, when you define prayer, Jesus actually lifted up to talk to God and said, "Why have you forsaken me? Forgive them, for they know not what they do." So I would consider those prayers as well.
What else? So what? I've got one. Thank you. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Appreciate it.
I didn't see it there. Got any of those?
I don't have those. I appreciate it. So I'm going to ask again, because I'm a teacher and I don't quit. What is a prayer? Okay. Yeah. Prayer is talking to God, is it not? I'm not trying to make this hard. This is not calculus. This is, what is a prayer? And it's real simple, isn't it? It's when we lift up a request or a statement. I mean, it doesn't even have to be a request, does it? It can just be a statement. It's just when we converse with God. That's how we converse with God. That's prayer. And so I think sometimes I want to be careful in what we classify as prayer. I want to look at some things today that when we read them in the Bible, normally, I don't know that we think of them as prayers, but I want to talk about those things. And the title of the lesson was, I think, Powerful Prayers in 10 Words or Less, or something like that. But what I want to look at are some very short things that are said today and see how those can apply in our lives. Let's turn to Matthew chapter 6. Matthew chapter 6. In chapter 6, verses 7 and 8, Jesus is talking, and he says, starting in verse 7, "When you pray, do not use vain repetitions as the heathens do, for they think that they will be heard for their many words. Therefore, do not be like them, for your Father knows the things you have need of before you ask him." So when we read that verse, what's Jesus saying? What is the main point of those two verses?
The words don't necessarily matter. It's what's in your heart.
Okay, it goes along with what we were saying. It's what comes from your heart. What else could it mean?
It's like when you're teaching a child to pray, you're memorizing certain words and you say them over and over and over just so it locks in. And I think as an adult, we say the same thing over and over and lock it in.
Okay, so again, it comes back to our heart and our meaning. If we're just doing it out of repetition, I'm guilty of this. If you're a guy and you've led the prayer in your household at every dinner, every meal, sometimes those things get to be a little bit rote, don't they? We say the same thing over and over. And even from praying at church, when you've led prayers for, 40 years, sometimes you just fall into a rhythm. And, I still think it's from your heart. I'm not saying that it's not sincere, but I think sometimes it's more of a mechanism of just repetition. Yes, sir.
Jewish dad's been dead probably, about 30 years now? And I think I could still repeat his mealtime prayer.
So when Jesus is talking here, I think one of the main points he's making is, verse 8 says, the Father knows the things you have need of before you ask him. And in verse 7, before that, he says, don't use vain repetitions as the heathens do. And he goes on, he's just telling us, I think, and I heard somebody say it, keep it simple, short and simple. God knows what you need. You don't need to. Do you ever feel like you're trying to impress God when you say a prayer? I can't impress God. He knows me. And it's telling us right there in verse 8, he knows what we need. So there's no need for just a long, drawn-out, wordy prayer unless that's what's coming from your heart. Now, am I telling you shouldn't say that? Some of these prayers that we were talking about, if you read them, there's several verses, and they're beautiful. And every word and every verse is meaningful. So we're not saying you can't have long prayers. I don't want you to go away saying, every time somebody steps up in the pulpit and they say a long prayer, we're going to accuse them of not being sincere. But, it doesn't have to be that way.
To me, it goes back to the word vain. In other words, are you just saying it to be saying it? Or is it really, like you said, coming from your heart? So if you're just saying lots of words to God or from the pulpit to impress, like you said, somebody, then that's vain repetition. And that's where the problem is to me.
Yeah.
I've been accused of saying long prayers by my family, and probably others too. But the bad thing is people that you cause them problems, so they start saying prayers to shorten them up. They are not coming from the heart because they're worried about your negative way of looking at them. So we have to be very careful of saying your prayer's too long and going into this. Some prayers are very long if you have a lot, and I think that could be more private prayers with just you and the Lord together, because when you get too far along in your prayers, they're more personal, and the audience don't really know what they're talking, so they can't say amen.
Yeah, I've heard some beautiful prayers from men leading prayers in church, but they last 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. They're almost mini sermons. And while they are very personal to that individual, sometimes it's really hard to follow and stay focused. And that's our fault. It is. And maybe that's our society, that we are so short, that we can't keep our focus and can't stay focused on something long enough to really enjoy it and appreciate it. But I do know that happens. And I'm not condemning that. That's not what we're getting at today. The focus of what I want to talk about today are how some short prayers can be just as powerful and just as beautiful as some of those long ones. Turn to Nehemiah chapter 6, if you will, please. Nehemiah chapter 6. Nehemiah chapter 6, verse 9, he says, "For they all were trying to make us afraid, saying, their hands will be weakened in the work, and it will not be done. Now, therefore, O God, strengthen my hands." Again, this is Nehemiah 6, verse 9. When he says this prayer, what were the exact, when you look at this and you're reading, does it come across as a prayer? In verse 9? Well, let me ask you this. What is the exact prayer in verse 9? Yes, he says specifically, oh God, strengthen my hands. The whole sentence in my version says, now therefore, O God, strengthen my hands. I think I counted 7 words. 7 words. What makes that a prayer? He's talking to God, isn't he? Does anybody remember the situation, the context of this? What was Nehemiah in the process of doing? Rebuilding what? The walls of Jerusalem. That's right. And the verse says at the very beginning, they were all trying to make us afraid, saying their hands will be weakened in the work and will not be done. Who is he talking about? Yeah, Bill said the people that were against him building the wall. If you remember the story of Nehemiah, they are surrounded, these people have returned to Jerusalem and they are beginning to build the wall. And it's an incredible story to read, really, if you read it from beginning to end, how quickly they were able to do it. But they were met with resistance from the people who lived around Jerusalem because they remembered that Jerusalem had been a powerful city, a beautiful city, and frankly, the people around them didn't want that back. And so they were discouraging. They were casting doubts. They were casting fears. They were accusing Nehemiah of wanting to be a king, and that we're gonna tell the king that you are trying to build a city and become a king yourself, so that you would be shut down. And Nehemiah says what? They're trying to do what? Trying to make us afraid, right? And so, as Nehemiah prays, what is his prayer for? Say it again. For strength. He prays for strength. He says, now therefore, strengthen my hand. Is he really wanting his hands to be physically strong?
Their resolve to be strengthened, their ability to complete it to be strengthened. It's more than just their hands.
Okay. So he's really, when he says strengthen my hands, he means just give me strength. Strengthen my hands, strengthen my heart as well. He needed the courage to continue to move, to continue to lead. And, is this a prayer that you might offer yourself at times? Have you ever caught yourself going, Lord, give me strength? Lord, give me strength. What a powerful prayer that is. How many times, do we face things in our life where we don't, sometimes we think, well, I've got to stop and say a prayer. You don't have to stop and say a prayer. It's a continual thought. It's a process. And and as you walk along, you may not even think about it, but how many times a day do you catch yourself talking to God? I don't know about you. I catch myself talking to God, and some days more than others. Yesterday I sat in a chair all day long and was sick and probably didn't say much to him. I asked him to help me get well, and I said some prayers, but I didn't have a continual conversation. There are days especially when I was working, when I was a teacher, I was constantly just under my breath talking to God. God, simple little things. God, be with that kid. Lord, help that kid. Lord, help me make it through this class. And I'm not trying to be flippant with it. I'm just saying that these are very short, quick prayers. And how do they help us?
Well, they help us because it shows we're always centered on God. But that, to me, describes pray without ceasing.
Okay, and we're going to get to that verse before this lesson ends. So, no, you're good. So let's look at some more. I don't want to just stop there. Look at Luke 18. Just going to beat this microphone up. Luke 18. In Luke 18, we have a story that we're given, and it compares two different people. You're all familiar with this parable. This is the parable that it starts in verse 9. It's the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector and the two men that are saying their prayers. And of course, if you're familiar with it, the Pharisee gets up and he prays exactly like Jesus said not to pray, doesn't he? What is his prayer? How would you describe the Pharisee's prayer? Conceited. Thank you, Lord. I'm better than everybody else. Jim, I didn't hear you.
I said, how righteous I am, how great I am. It was all about I am.
Exactly. The prayer was about him. He was glorifying himself, wasn't he? So it goes back to the verse we read earlier where Jesus tells us what? Don't use vain words. I mean, to me, that is the description of what Jesus said, don't do.
He condemned the tax collector. You know, he looked and he compared himself. And that, to me, maybe we do that sometime, and we shouldn't. And that's a great example right here where we shouldn't do it and how God saw it.
Absolutely. And you know what? I should have done this first. Let's read the parable. Verse 9, again, we're in Luke chapter 18, verse 9. Also, he spoke the parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and despised others. 2 men went up to pray in the temple, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood and prayed thus with himself, God, I thank you that I am not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even as this tax collector. I fast twice a week, I give tithes of all that I possess. And the tax collector, standing afar off, would not so much as raise his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. When we look in verse 13, as we look in verse 13, there's a beautiful prayer right there as well. Somebody tell me what that prayer is. God, be merciful to me, a sinner. Again, this is a prayer that I think we can all relate to. I don't know about you, but there have been times in my life where I'm at a low point, and I need God, and I need Him bad. And have you ever sat in a prayer? Have you ever sat by yourself in prayer and not been able to think of anything else? I've had times where I've been in a prayer and I can't use a lot of words because I don't have a lot of words that are coming. Because I have been in prayer and I'm saying, God, I am a sinner and I don't deserve to talk to you. I'm not worthy to sit in front of you. Why do you even want to listen to me? David says prayers like this in the Psalms. Why do you listen to me? Who am I? And if you've ever had that kind of, I don't know if desperation is the right word, but agony, you know that you've done something wrong, you know that you're in a bad place, and you need God. And this is a beautiful prayer. God, be merciful to me, a sinner. It's not very long, but it's very, very powerful. And so this is another one of those short little prayers that I thought was, as I was looking these up, I thought, man, that's a great example. There are times when all I can do is just say thank you. And hopefully I do it enough, but there's a lot of times when I just say thank you. Let's look at a few more. As a matter of fact, let's get some of you to read these for me. Can I get a volunteer to read Matthew chapter 8, verse 2? If you'll raise your hand, and then I've got a couple more I'm going to give out before we actually start reading. All right, Bobby said he'll take Matthew chapter 8. I need somebody to take, Bobby, that was 8, verse 2. I need somebody else to take Matthew chapter 9, verse 27. Casey said he'll take that one. All right, so Casey, that was Matthew 9, 27. I need somebody to take Luke 17, verse 13. Jeff said he'd take Luke 17, 13. And then if someone will take John 4, 49. All right, Bill? All right, thank you. All right. So, Mr. Bobby, would you please do Matthew 8, verse 2?
Yep, Matthew 8, 2. A man with leprosy came and knelt before him and said, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean.
All right, so the man, a leper, came and said, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. All right, Casey? Matthew 9, 27.
As Jesus went on from there, 2 blind men followed him, calling out, Have mercy on us, Son of David.
All right. So here you've got some men that are going and they cry out, Son of David, or have mercy on me, or have mercy on us, Son of David. Luke 17, verse 13. Jeff?
I'm going to start in 12 because it's talking about who it's talking about. As he was going into the village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance and called out in a loud voice, Jesus, Master, have pity on us.
Okay, so you had, again, several lepers that called out, Jesus, Master, have pity on us. Bill, I'm going to hand this one to you. Okay. Sorry. John 4:49.
Oh, I was in the wrong chapter.
You were wondering what I was giving you, weren't you?
Yeah, I read it. It didn't make sense.
I'm going to steal this from you and let your son give you one that may not have my cooties on it.
Okay, John 4:49, the royal official said, Sir, come down before my child dies.
Okay, so we have 4 prayers here. In Matthew chapter 8, verse 2, we've got a statement that says, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. And again, this is a leper. And who is he speaking to? He's talking directly to Jesus, isn't he? And he acknowledges who Jesus is. What does he start with? He says, Lord. Yeah, I heard several of you say it. He says, Lord. In Matthew 9, verse 27, you've got 2 blind men that are crying out. What do they say? Have mercy on us, Son of David. Again, why are they using the term Son of David? They understood, didn't they? They understood who the Messiah was supposed to be. So they're acknowledging that he is God and that he has the power to do these things. Again, Luke 17, verse 13, it says they lifted up their voices and said, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. So they are acknowledging Jesus as Lord, as powerful. They're acknowledging his power. And then in John chapter 4, verse 49, he doesn't give him he doesn't call him Lord. He says, Sir. But then he follows that up with a statement, doesn't he? And the statement is, what kind of a statement? He says, come down before my child dies. What kind of a statement is that? It's a plead, isn't it?
I don't think he was a Jew, so he didn't know to call him Lord, I guess, but he knew that he was a special person.
Okay, yeah, he might not necessarily have understood the Messiah concept, but he knew that this man heals people. This man has power that comes from somewhere else. And he had, I would say this was a statement of faith. Statement of faith. Lord, or Sir, if you will come down and heal my daughter. What are all of these people asking for in these 4 verses? Health. They're asking for health. They're asking for Jesus to have mercy on them and heal them, or to heal, in the one case, the man's daughter. Is that, is that the kind of prayer that we find ourselves asking? Yes, absolutely. How many times have you so I don't want to step on toes. If you're looking at Facebook, or if you're talking to a friend and they tell you, oh yeah, so-and-so is sick, pray for me. Or you see on Facebook where it says, hey, would you please lift up prayers? And you get all these people that send back the little prayer emoji and oh yeah, prayers from. I sometimes wonder, are they actually saying a prayer or are they just typing it in? And are we sometimes guilty of saying, yeah, I'll pray for you, and then we may not ever actually do it? Does that ever happen And one of the things that I've learned is that when I tell someone I'm going to pray for them, immediately I at least lift up a sentence or two for that person. Because if I don't, I may not remember later on. I get into prayer sometimes and I don't know how you pray at your house, but when Tina and I are praying, there are times where I just get stuck and Tina will toss a name in. And then I keep going because I don't always remember. And so sometimes when I tell someone I'm going to pray for you, I take a second at least and Lord, please heal this person. Please help them through this situation. And I try to make sure that, I'm not just giving them my thoughts and prayers. I'm actually lifting a prayer up for them. And I think sometimes we have to be careful, but it's something that's easy, it's quick, and it's still, I believe, very powerful and very effective. What does the Bible tell us about the prayers of a righteous person?
It avails much.
It avails much, right? And so if we have many, if you've ever been in a situation, and I know there are a lot of people in here that have had cancer and been in very sick type situations, when people pray for you, I feel like I have felt their prayers. I know that sounds funny to say, but I have been to the point, and I've talked a little bit about it before, I've been to the point of almost being dead, and people were praying for me. And I felt the power of those prayers. And actually it came with a little bit of a weight because there were so many prayers, and I knew it. But I think, how powerful is it that I've had people walk by and tell me, I said a quick prayer for you. I said a prayer for you. And how powerful that is. And it does not have to be long. It doesn't have to be extensive. Just, I've had somebody put their hand on me, put their arm around my shoulder, and just real quick, Lord, be with him as he gets ready to do this. And then we move on. And I just think that that's a strong, powerful, and a beautiful thing. So short prayers can be effective. Let's look at some more.
Before you do that.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. Old Jabbermouth is wanting to talk. All I was going to say, I find watching TV and stuff, and I see these tragedies and stuff going on, a little child hurt, and it immediately, something comes over me. I stop right then. I know him, never see him again, and I pray for him, pray for the family, and pray. And I think if we all, whenever we see something, just lift them up in prayer, because they may not know it, but God knows it, and that's where the key goes in. Where if God knows you're praying for him.
Jim said something that just kind of reminded me, and I would imagine most of you have seen the airplane crash this week. I know there's been 2 or 3 of them. But I saw the video of the helicopter that flew into the airplane. And if you've seen that video, I don't know about you, the first time I saw it, it was a pretty powerful video, because you realize what's happening at the moment you see that little fireball in the sky. There's people that have just died. And we have a tendency to get desensitized to that because we see it so much in movies and videos and things. But when you look up and it's a real accident, and you know that video you just watched, there were people that died immediately in that video. It hit me, and I remember doing what you're saying. I remember I saw that video, I was just, God be with the families of the people that were on those 2 vehicles, because what a horrible thing. Plus, those families are having to see it over and over. And they may not watch, but people are talking about it. That's that's one of the bad things about social media. It's there forever.
Most of y'all know my sister Rachel. She's a pre-K teacher and has been for 40 years now. But she teaches her kids when they see or hear ambulance, fire truck, police car. She's got a little prayer, not exactly sure how it goes, but her kids know it. And it's something like, God bless the police officer, ambulance driver, fireman, and whoever they're going to go assist. It's in some form, that little prayer, just by hearing or seeing a emergency vehicle. And so these kids from 4-year-old on are going to know to do that.
Yeah, it's and it's, if it becomes a part of your routine, which I don't want to say that it's a routine. I want to say that it's a part of what you do, what you're aware of. It's a beautiful thing. I know that the time that I got sick, I had to be on a care flight. I got helicoptered to a hospital, and then I got flown on a jet. And so now every time I hear a helicopter, it doesn't matter whether it's a medical helicopter or not. It reminds me to say a quick prayer for the people that are in that helicopter. And you can usually tell if you can see it, if it's a medical helicopter. And if it's a medical helicopter, I usually have a little more deep of a prayer, but just hearing helicopter blades makes me say a quick prayer, because I remember the need that I had for prayer and what it meant to my family. And so, I know that's a little reminder for me. So it's kind of like you're saying, when we hear sirens, I think that's a great thing to teach your kids. When you see a emergency vehicle and you hear sirens, and somebody's in need. And that's a neat thing to teach your kids. And not only that, it teaches them to be what? Sympathetic, merciful, aware of the needs of those around us, because that's what we miss so often, isn't it? Go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to add to what Missy said, or more, not add to it, I guess, but a friend of mine, that's whenever she and her kids were in the car, anytime an ambulance went by, they said a prayer together.
Together?
Yeah, they said a prayer together for whoever was in that ambulance or wherever that ambulance was going. But I was always impressed by that. So it was interesting to hear that Rachel had been teaching her kids to do that too, her kids that she taught. And I was really impressed by that, because it never occurred to me to do anything like that with my kids growing up.
And I agree. I think that's a wonderful thing, a beautiful thing to do, to teach your children to be that aware and to pray. Amanda? Sorry.
You mentioned something about what you had experienced and how.
You're way over here.
You mentioned what you had experienced and how that made you, whenever you hear a helicopter, it puts you in the mindset to pray. And I think a lot of times in today's society, it's hustle and bustle. We're going and going and going, and, well, I don't have time for this, or I just want to shoot up this quick prayer. When I think about the times that I really needed prayer, and that just thinking about them now gets me very emotional, and I think, I wish people would pray for me, and I'm trying to get everyone I can to pray for me because I really need these prayers. When I think about that and that someone else could be experiencing that, I have plenty of time. Whatever I have going on, it's not that important. Whatever thing that needs to get done right now, it doesn't. I can stop and really say a prayer. I can talk to God and plead on these people's behalf, whether I really know them or have a relationship with them or not. And I think if we stop and think about, okay, hold on, if it was me, what about when I need this? I think we can find that we have time. We really have time for something that really matters.
Yeah, and so thank you, Amanda. And so if you couldn't hear what she said, it's an opportunity to really personalize prayer when we take the time to think, I know what it's like to need prayer. I know what it's like to desire the prayers of other people. And so when we personalize like that, it makes it a lot easier for us to stop and take a minute. And I think what's important that she said is that all of a sudden we have time, because it becomes a priority to us, because we understand, we empathize with other people.
I was just going to say, in my career, hundreds of times I've seen awful, awful things and get on scene, and just a simple, my first thought is, what am I going to do here? And then my next is, God, help me with this one. And that's it. That's the only prayer. But I was able to move forward, and put some of that junk that bogs you down, put it away, because I gave it to God. And then I was able to go ahead and do what I was supposed to do. Didn't make it any easier sometimes, but it gave me a path.
And so as we move through this lesson, that's really, the point that I want to make sure comes out is the fact that, like Chuck said, and for those of you that may not know, maybe knew, Chuck was a fireman. And so the things they deal with when they come up on accidents. And so, his point that he made is I think, powerful. He could say a prayer, and something he said caught me right there. He said it allowed him to put aside some things because he had said that prayer and given it to God. When we give those things that are in our way to God, and it allowed him then to move forward and do the things he needed to do to help those other people. I think that's a beautiful way to put it. Let's look real quick at a few more. Matthew 8, verse 25. Then his disciples came to him and awoke him, saying, Lord, save us, we are perishing. And then in Matthew 14, verse 30, it says, But when he saw that the wind was boisterous and he was afraid and beginning to sink, he cried out, saying, Lord, save me. These are two examples of the apostles crying out to Jesus. The first one was where the apostles were in the boat. And you remember the story. Jesus is asleep, and the storm comes on them, and it's such a bad storm. And don't forget that many of these are fishermen. They don't scare easy. They're used to these things. But this storm apparently was bad enough that it made them fear for their lives, and they woke Jesus up and asked him to take care of them. And their simple prayer was, Lord, save us, we are perishing. Have y'all ever read that story and thought of that as a prayer? I don't think I haven't ever really, I know they asked him, but what is that? Is that not the definition of a prayer? They recognized who they were, they gave the authority to Jesus. They realized they had to have his help, and they petitioned Jesus at that moment for help. And again, what a powerful prayer. Lord, save us, we are perishing. I know I haven't used the word perishing in a prayer. But I have said, God, save me. I need your help. Take care of me right here. How many have been driving? This is what I think of, where you're driving down, especially like I-35, and it's busy, and all of a sudden a storm hits, and it's raining so hard that you're getting sheets of water, and you cannot see more than, 20 yards ahead of you. And I'm going to have to keep going 65, because if I go 50, I'm going to get hit in the back end. But I can't really see the taillights of the car in front of me. How does that make you feel? Those are the times where I'd say I'm as close as these apostles were to being in a boat in a storm. Yeah, I'm not ever out in a boat in a storm, and you won't get me out in a boat in a storm. But you'll get me in a car driving in traffic with other people, in Texas especially, in these flash thunderstorms where I can't see and I am scared to death. And all I do is, normally while I'm driving, I'm praying, because I'm not comfortable at all. So, I think there's some of this for us as well. And of course, there's all kinds of situations that some of you may find yourself in. But, one of the, kind of sad, I think you can tell a lot about a person by what comes out of their mouth in a situation like this. I've been in a few car wrecks with different people, and I'm always, looking back. Ooh, did you hear what he said before he had that? Y'all understand what I'm saying? Bad words coming out of their mouth before they have an accident. And I think, I hope that's not what comes out of my heart when I'm in that situation. I hope that if I'm in a situation like that, I hope that what comes from my heart that comes, it says, out of our hearts, out of our mouths comes the overflow of our heart, right? And I hope that if I'm in that situation, the words I say are, God, help me. Jesus, help me. Lord, save me. Much more than profanity. And I think y'all know what I'm talking about. Just that when people find themselves in certain situations, car pulls out in front of them, and the first thing that comes out of their mouth is a bad word. And so, I think that even those little statements, though, God, help me. Lord, take care of us here.
I'm just going to add to your thought. I watch a lot of tornadoes and storms on internet to watch the actual, and it's really horrible to hear what the people saying as a tornado's about to hit the house. I don't even want to repeat some of the stuff I hear, but very seldom do I hear him, oh, God, help me. Very seldom.
I agree. And if you couldn't understand him, he's talking about people that you see on these videos that see like a tornado coming right at their house and things like that, and their responses. I'm about out of time, but I do want to encourage you to learn to make a conversation, to make your life a conversation with God. And I think that and I think Mary mentioned it earlier, and I've got the verse written down here. If you go to 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, and we don't have time to read it, but it talks about pray without ceasing. This is what I think pray without ceasing looks like. It doesn't have to be a long, continuous, multi-sentence prayer. Praying without ceasing it's a way of life. It's a way of heart. It's a way of, whenever you're in a situation, the first thing that comes out is a sentence or a comment or a request to God, where we're saying powerful things like, God, help me. I wrote some things down here. God, please be with, even I'm sorry, Lord. Have you ever done something and immediately thought, oh, God, I'm sorry. Please forgive me for that. I shouldn't have said that.
I also think, and I have trouble with this, and I'm working on it, and that is that the first thing that comes out of our mouth after he has helped us should be thank you. And even when it's not after he's just helped us, anything that, we ought to be on our hearts all the time. Every time something good happens or something, that we should be saying thank you, more than I do anyway. That ought to be the first thing that we think of, is thanking God instead of,
Well, and again, I want to leave you this morning with that thought in your mind. As you go through the week, try to be aware of your conversation with God. Try to be aware of situations where you can say, God, thank you. Lord, I appreciate that. Or, God, I'm sorry. Or, if you see somebody in need, don't wait for them to ask for your prayer. Just offer it. We know several people in here that are sick or that are hurting. And when you see their face or you think of their name, say a quick prayer for them. God, be with him, be with her. Anyway, that's all I have for